It's funny how life can throw you into moments you don't even realize are pivotal until much later. For me, it was a lazy Saturday at an outdoor festival. I remember the weather being perfect, not too hot, just warm enough to make the breeze feel like a soft touch. The place was crowded, vendors calling out about their handmade crafts, children running with sticky fingers from cotton candy, and the hum of a local band playing somewhere in the distance. I wasn't really into these events. If I'm being honest, I only went because my buddies insisted. "Get out of the house, Elijah," they said. "You're like an old man stuck in a 30-year-old's body." And then I saw her. She was standing near a booth selling vintage records, laughing so loudly it turned heads. I glanced over, and for a moment, it felt like the whole scene slowed down. She had this easy confidence about her, shoulders back, head tilted slightly as she teased the guy she was with. Not a boyfriend, I could tell that much. He had that awkward, "I'm trying but she's out of my league" energy. Cassandra, though? She was magnetic. Her laugh wasn't polite. It was real, the kind that made you want to lean in just to hear more of it. I don't even know what possessed me, but I walked up to that booth, pretending to look at the records. I wasn't smooth about it, either. I stood there, flipping through albums I didn't recognize, feeling like an idiot. She must have noticed because when I glanced up, she was looking right at me. Her eyes crinkled in amusement, and before I could think of an excuse to leave, she spoke. "Big vinyl guy, huh?" she asked, her tone playful. "Yeah," I lied, holding up a random record. "I've been looking for this one." She peeked over to see what I had and smirked. "Pretty sure that's a recording of whale sounds." That was it. I was caught, and I laughed despite myself. "Okay, you got me. I have no idea what I'm doing here." "Well, lucky for you, I'm an expert," she said, brushing past me to flip through the collection. "You stick around, I might teach you a thing or two." We ended up talking for the next hour, drifting from records to coffee to a bench where we could escape the noise. Her energy was infectious. Every story she told, every small observation about the people around us, had me hooked. And she seemed genuinely interested in me, asking questions like I was the most fascinating person she'd met all day. I'd never experienced that before, not in the way Cassandra made me feel. I'm naturally reserved, the kind of guy who thinks 10 steps ahead before making a move. But with her, all of that planning melted away. She made spontaneity seem easy, like it was the only way to live. By the time the sun was setting, she was scribbling her number on the back of a receipt. "Call me," she said, her voice teasing but her eyes serious. "Unless you're scared of a little adventure." Of course, I called. And that call turned into a date, which turned into a dozen more, and before I knew it, we were in love. Everything felt so natural, like the universe had decided to give us this one perfect connection. She said she admired how steady I was, how I seemed to have everything figured out. I liked how she made me feel alive in ways I hadn't known I was missing. Our wedding a year later was small but beautiful. Cassandra wore a dress that made her look like something out of a dream. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found her, to have someone who turned even the simplest days into something extraordinary. It wasn't just about love, it felt like we were building something together, something solid and lasting. But as life would soon teach me, even the strongest foundations can crack when you least expect it. Looking back now, I wonder if I missed the early signs, those tiny tremors beneath the surface. Maybe I just didn't want to see them. The first year of marriage felt like a continuation of the fairy tale. Cassandra and I threw ourselves into creating a life together. We moved into a small but charming house on the edge of town, one with a picket fence that she insisted we paint bright white. I spent weekends building furniture from scratch, something she claimed gave our home character, while she added her flair with antique store finds and carefully curated plants. It felt like a real partnership, both of us working toward the same goal, building a life that felt uniquely ours. But life doesn't stop throwing challenges at you, even when things seem perfect. Cassandra was the owner of a boutique downtown, a quaint little place filled with vintage clothing, handmade jewelry, and other unique items. Business was steady, but it required a lot of her attention. Meanwhile, I was juggling deadlines as an architect, working on a few ambitious projects that could make or break my reputation. At first, we found ways to balance it all. Late-night dinners, long talks about our dreams, and promises to never let work overshadow our relationship. Somewhere along the way, though, the balance shifted. It started small, as these things often do. Cassandra grew less interested in our evenings together, often absorbed in her phone or claiming she needed an early night. She stopped asking about my projects, and when I asked about her boutique, she'd brush it off, saying everything was fine. Her laughter, the thing that first drew me to her, felt more distant, more guarded. I remember the first argument like it was yesterday. It wasn't even about anything serious, just a stupid disagreement over how I folded the laundry. I like to keep things neat, folding each shirt into precise rectangles. Cassandra had her own way of doing it, and one day she snapped at me. "Why does it matter how I fold them, Elijah? It's just laundry," she said, her voice sharp in a way I wasn't used to. "I didn't mean anything by it," I replied, trying to diffuse the tension. "I was just—" "You always have to have everything your way," she interrupted, slamming the laundry basket down on the counter. "Do you ever stop to think that maybe I'm tired of living up to your standards?" Her words stung, but more than that, they confused me. I'd always thought of myself as easygoing, someone who avoided conflict. Was I really that controlling? The rest of the evening was tense, filled with awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at small talk. After that, things didn't improve. Cassandra started nitpicking over little things: how I loaded the dishwasher, how often I hung out with my friends, even the way I drank my coffee. She'd roll her eyes at my attempts to engage her in conversation, dismissing me with curt responses. It felt like I was suddenly walking on eggshells, unsure of what might set her off. Then came the accusations. It was a Saturday morning, and I had plans to play golf with a few old college buddies. Cassandra had been quiet all week, but as I grabbed my clubs, she suddenly snapped. "Must be nice to have so much free time," she said, arms crossed as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "Nothing," she replied, her tone icy. "Just wondering how you find the time to go golfing when you're so busy with work." "Cassandra, it's just a couple of hours," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're acting like I'm leaving for a week." She didn't respond, just shook her head and muttered something under her breath as she walked out of the room. When I came back that afternoon, she barely looked at me, and when I tried to ask what was wrong, she accused me of being neglectful. "You're always off doing your own thing," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you even care about this marriage anymore?" I was floored. "Of course I care," I said, my voice rising in frustration. "Where is this coming from?" But she wouldn't explain, and I was left wondering if I had somehow failed her without realizing it. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. She started working late more often, claiming the boutique needed extra attention. On weekends, she'd make vague plans with friends I'd never met, returning home hours after she said she would. When I questioned her, she'd accuse me of being paranoid or controlling. Looking back, I can see how the cracks were widening, but at the time, I just thought we were going through a rough patch. Every couple does, right? I told myself things would get better, that we'd find our way back to the connection we once had. I clung to that belief because the alternative, that our marriage was already falling apart, was too painful to consider. But the truth was, something had shifted, and I was starting to realize I might not be the man she wanted anymore. Things between Cassandra and me had reached a place I couldn't fully understand, but I told myself it was just life being complicated. We both had responsibilities, and stress has a way of making people distant, right? That's what I kept telling myself, even when her smiles felt forced, and her affection grew colder. I thought we could fix it, that it was just a matter of time and effort. Then she brought up the trip. It was a Wednesday evening, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing some blueprints for an upcoming project. Cassandra came in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she set her purse down. She looked tired but had that determined look on her face, the one that said she had something important to say. "Elijah," she began, leaning against the counter. "We need to talk." I set my pen down, immediately wary. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, as if she was rehearsing her words. "I've been feeling overwhelmed lately. The boutique, the house, everything. I need a break." "A break?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yeah," she said quickly, as if to avoid any further questions. "Just a little time away to clear my head." Some of the girls were talking about a trip to Europe. A couple of weeks, maybe 3. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. We'd never talked about her needing time away before. You want to go to Europe with your friends? I asked carefully. When? Next month, she said, avoiding my eyes. I already looked into flights. It's the perfect time. Business is slow, and it's before the holiday rush. There was something off about the way she was speaking, a defensiveness that didn't match the moment. I tried to focus on the practicalities. What about the boutique? And the expenses? She waved her hand dismissively. The boutique will be fine. Claire can manage things while I'm gone, and I've been saving up for this. I wanted to argue, to tell her that running away wouldn't solve anything, but I bit my tongue. If this was what she needed, who was I to stand in her way? Still, the idea of her leaving for weeks didn't sit right with me. Why didn't you talk to me about this sooner? I asked. I didn't think it'd be a big deal, she said, her tone sharp. Do I really need your permission to take a trip, Elijah? That stung. Of course not, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But this feels sudden. I just want to make sure this is about what you say it's about. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw the flash of anger. What's that supposed to mean? I'm just asking, I said, raising my hands in surrender. If you're feeling overwhelmed, we could take a trip together. You don't have to go alone, she scoffed, shaking her head. This isn't about us. It's about me. I need space, Elijah. Just a little space. That word, space, hung in the air between us. I wanted to push back, to tell her that marriage wasn't about taking space every time things got tough. But I didn't. I just nodded, swallowing my unease. All right, I said finally. If that's what you need. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, she said, walking over to kiss my cheek before heading upstairs. As the days passed, I tried to convince myself that this trip could be a good thing. Maybe Cassandra really did need time to recharge. Maybe she'd come back happier, more present, and we could finally address the growing distance between us. But as her departure date drew closer, my unease only deepened. She became even more distant, spending hours on her phone or locked in her office. When I asked her about the trip, her answers were short and vague. She'd already packed by the time I got home from work the night before her flight, and when I offered to drive her to the airport, she declined, saying her friends had arranged everything. The morning she left, she barely looked at me as she said goodbye. I'll call when I land, she said casually, pulling her suitcase toward the door. Take care of yourself. And just like that, she was gone. For the first few days, I tried to shake off the nagging feeling in my chest. I focused on work, told myself I was overreacting. But her messages were few and far between, and when she did text, they felt hollow. When she posted pictures online, something about them didn't sit right. There were inconsistencies, different locations than she'd mentioned, people I didn't recognize. Then came the photo that changed everything. It was a short video she'd accidentally uploaded, quickly deleted but not before I saw it. Cassandra was sitting in a cafe, laughing, really laughing, the way she hadn't in months. And she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, leaning in close, his hand casually resting on hers. I didn't recognize him, but the look on her face was unmistakable. That was the moment the doubt became something sharper. Something real. I didn't know who the man was, but I knew what that kind of intimacy looked like. And I knew I had to find out the truth. Cassandra's absence wasn't just a physical void, it was a constant, gnawing presence in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and the unease inside me grew stronger with each passing moment. Her texts became less frequent, short and curt replies to my questions, lacking the warmth I'd once known. The woman who used to send me selfies of her morning coffee or ramble about her day in long messages now barely managed, "I'm fine. Hope you're well." Then there were her social media posts. While Cassandra had always been active online, her Europe trip brought a sudden surge of pictures. But something felt off. The settings were stunning: sun-drenched streets in Rome, charming canals in Venice, bustling markets in Barcelona, but they felt more like stock images than glimpses into her life. She was smiling, sure, but not in a way that felt familiar. It was the kind of smile you wear for the sake of the camera, not the kind that lights up a room. And then there was the man. At first, he appeared in the background, blurry, out of focus, but undeniably present. In a group photo she captioned, "Best night with the best people," He stood just behind her, close enough to make my stomach tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just a random traveler or friend of a friend. He was someone. I tried to ignore it, to reason with myself that I was reading too much into it. But the video she accidentally posted shattered any illusions I had left. Watching her laugh like that, so effortlessly, with him sitting across from her, his hand casually grazing hers, it was like a punch to the gut. That laugh wasn't for me anymore. I told myself to wait, to give her the chance to explain when she got back. But my instincts wouldn't let me rest. I needed to know the truth, and waiting wasn't an option. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I started with the man in the photos. A quick reverse image search didn't turn up much, but his face stuck in my mind. He was about my age, maybe a little younger, with a confident air that reminded me of the men Cassandra used to joke about at fancy dinner parties. The ones who think the world revolves around them. And yet, here he was, revolving around my wife. The breakthrough came when I decided to check her deleted video. Cassandra wasn't particularly tech-savvy, and she didn't realize that even if something was removed from her social media, it still lingered in her phone's cloud storage. I used the login she'd given me years ago when we were setting up her new phone. It wasn't snooping, I told myself, it was survival. The video was still there, along with a few other pictures she hadn't posted. In one, she and the man were leaning against a fountain, their shoulders brushing. In another, they were sitting at an outdoor cafe, sharing a plate of something. The familiarity between them was unmistakable. My heart sank as I scrolled through the images. It wasn't just a friendship, not the way she looked at him, not the way he touched her arm. There was intimacy there, a closeness I hadn't felt from her in months. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I spent the next few days gathering everything I could: timestamps, locations, screenshots. I even reached out to a friend who worked in private investigations. He confirmed what I already suspected. Cassandra wasn't just on a trip to clear her head. She was traveling with him. When she finally returned home, I thought I'd feel some kind of relief. Instead, I felt cold, detached, like the man who'd loved her so fiercely was fading into someone else entirely. She walked through the door with the same suitcase she'd packed weeks ago, her face glowing from the sun and the thrill of adventure. "Elijah," she said brightly, dropping her bag and leaning in for a kiss. "I missed you." I froze, staring at her like she was a stranger. "Did you?" Her smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched her, waiting for her to fill the silence. She didn't. "How was Europe?" I asked finally, my voice calm but hollow. "It was amazing," she said, her tone guarded now. "Exactly what I needed." I nodded slowly. "And Ryan? Was he amazing too?" Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about, Cassandra," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut. "I know about him. I know about the dinners, the pictures, the accidental video you deleted. Do you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I saw the flash of panic in her eyes before she composed herself, crossing her arms defensively. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice wavering. "He's just a friend." "A friend?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Is that what you call it now? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been building more than a friendship." "Elijah." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me by pretending this is innocent. I've seen enough to know the truth." Her silence said more than any denial ever could. For the first time in our relationship, I realized that the woman I'd built a life with, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was a stranger to me. And there was no going back. The days after Cassandra's return were tense, to say the least. We barely spoke, moving around the house like strangers sharing a roof out of necessity. She didn't try to explain much after my initial confrontation, instead retreating behind a wall of excuses and deflections. Her boutique became her sanctuary, and she spent more time there than ever before. I tried to focus on work, but the weight of what I'd uncovered was impossible to ignore. My mind was a storm of questions and doubts. How long had she been lying to me? What was the extent of her relationship with Ryan? Most importantly, was there any way to salvage what we had left? It didn't help that Cassandra seemed more agitated as the days passed. Small disagreements turned into full-blown arguments. One evening, as we sat in the living room, trying and failing to make small talk, she exploded. "You've been distant," she accused, her arms crossed as she glared at me. "Do you even want to fix this, Elijah?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Me? You're asking if I want to fix this?" "Yes, you," she snapped, her voice trembling with frustration. "You've been cold, distant, like you've already made up your mind about us." My patience snapped. "I'm sorry if I'm not jumping to forgive you for sneaking off to Europe with another man," I shouted. "What exactly do you want from me, Cassandra? To pretend like nothing happened?" Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize, might finally take responsibility for what she'd done. Instead, she threw her hands in the air. "You're impossible," she yelled, storming off to the bedroom and slamming the door behind her. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we had gotten here. The woman I married, the one who used to laugh at my bad jokes, who stayed up late planning our future, felt like a distant memory. A week later, the real bombshell dropped. Cassandra came home early from the boutique, her face pale and her movements nervous. She avoided my eyes as she set her purse on the counter and leaned against it, arms folded tightly across her chest. "Elijah," she said, her voice softer than usual. "We need to talk." I froze. Those words rarely meant anything good. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. She hesitated, biting her lip like she was searching for the right words. "There's something I need to tell you," she began. "Something I've been holding back." The room felt impossibly quiet as I waited for her to continue. My heart pounded, my mind racing through every possible scenario. "I'm pregnant," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. At first, I didn't know what to say. My thoughts tangled together, a mix of disbelief, confusion, and, against my better judgment, a flicker of hope. "Pregnant," I repeated, my voice strained. "You're sure?" She nodded, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. "I took a test last week, and I saw a doctor today to confirm it. I'm about 2 months along." For a brief moment, I let myself feel something other than anger or sadness. A child. We'd talked about it before, always saying we'd wait until the time was right. Maybe this was a sign, an opportunity to turn things around, to rebuild what we'd lost. But then, just as quickly, the doubt crept in. 2 months. The timeline didn't add up. The realization must have shown on my face because Cassandra's expression shifted, a flicker of panic flashing in her eyes. "Elijah," she said, her tone almost pleading. "I know this is a lot, but I need you to trust me. This baby, is it mine?" I interrupted, my voice colder than I intended. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she was struggling to find the words. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. My chest tightened, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Is it mine, Cassandra?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. It could be." I stared at her, stunned. The betrayal I'd been grappling with for weeks suddenly felt so much deeper, so much sharper. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the future I thought we were building together. "You don't know," I repeated, my voice hollow. "Unbelievable." "Elijah, please," she said, stepping closer, her hands outstretched as if to comfort me. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I was confused. I snapped, stepping back. "You don't accidentally get pregnant with another man's child, Cassandra. You made choices. Choices that destroyed everything we had." She started to cry, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to steady myself. The anger, the hurt, the sheer disbelief, it was all too much. "We'll get a test," I said finally, my voice tight. "A paternity test. And until we have those results, I don't want to hear another word." Cassandra didn't argue. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face as she retreated to the bedroom. For the first time, I didn't follow her. That night, I sat alone in the dark, staring at nothing and feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. My marriage, my trust, my sense of stability, it was all crumbling around me. And for the first time, I wondered if there was anything left to salvage. The days leading up to the test were some of the longest of my life. I felt trapped in a fog of disbelief and anger, the kind that seeped into every corner of my mind. Cassandra kept her distance, leaving early for work and coming home late. When she was around, the silence between us was suffocating. I wanted to demand answers, to yell and scream until she admitted everything. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her again, not until I had the results in hand. I reached out to the clinic myself, arranging for the test as quickly as possible. Cassandra agreed to go, her demeanor subdued but cooperative. She didn't argue, didn't try to plead her case again. If anything, she seemed resigned, like she already knew how this was going to end. The appointment itself was clinical, sterile, and impersonal. The technician took my sample first, a quick swab inside my cheek, then called Cassandra into the next room. I sat in the waiting area, staring at the pale green walls and trying to ignore the pounding of my heart. She came out a few minutes later, avoiding my gaze as she murmured, "It's done." I didn't say anything, just nodded and walked past her to the car. The ride home was silent, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. When we pulled into the driveway, Cassandra hesitated before getting out. "Elijah," she said softly, her hand hovering over the door handle. "No matter what happens, I need you to know I didn't mean for things to turn out like this." I clenched my jaw, staring straight ahead. "You keep saying that like it changes anything." She didn't respond, just nodded and stepped out of the car. I watched her walk inside, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and sadness. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I just needed confirmation. The results came back faster than I expected. 3 days later, I received a call from the clinic. The woman on the other end of the line spoke in the calm, detached tone of someone who delivered bad news 1,000 times before. "The test confirms that you are not the biological father," she said simply. "If you'd like, I can email you the full report." I barely managed a strained "yes please" before hanging up. The words repeated in my head like a broken record, "not the biological father." It was as if someone had physically pulled the ground out from under me, leaving me suspended in a void of disbelief. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the email notification on my phone without opening it. I didn't need to read the report to know what it said. All the doubts, the suspicions, they were no longer just in my head. They were real, undeniable. When I finally walked into the house, Cassandra was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of guilt and apprehension. "Elijah," she began, but I cut her off. "It's not mine," I said flatly, holding up my phone. "The test confirmed it." She looked away, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know for sure. I was hoping." "Hoping what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "That the baby would magically turn out to be mine? That all of this would just go away?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. The anger inside me was too raw, too overwhelming to temper with compassion. "You didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth," I continued. "You lied. Cassandra. You lied, and now you expect me to, what? Forgive you?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed, her voice barely audible. It just happened. I was confused and—" "Stop," I interrupted, my tone cutting through her words like a knife. "Stop making excuses. You didn't just happen to sleep with someone else. You made a choice. A deliberate choice that destroyed everything we built together." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly swallowed by the enormity of her betrayal. "I'll pack my things," she said finally, her voice muffled. "If that's what you want." I stared at her, the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with, and felt nothing but emptiness. "Do whatever you want," I said coldly, turning toward the stairs. "I'm done." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. My marriage, my trust, my future as a father, it was all gone, ripped away by the one person I thought I could rely on. And as much as I wanted to, I couldn't see a way forward. Not yet. The days following the paternity test were a blur of paperwork, silence, and heavy tension. Cassandra stayed in the house at first, though we barely exchanged words. She moved like a ghost through the halls, her presence a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I avoided her as much as possible, throwing myself into work and any excuse to stay out of the house. But every time I came home, the weight of her betrayal was waiting for me, suffocating in its intensity. Finally, after a week of this unbearable limbo, she broke the silence. "I think it's time I move out," she said one evening, standing in the doorway of the living room. Her voice was quiet, her posture defeated. I didn't look up from the folder I was pretending to read. Probably for the best. She hesitated, as if expecting me to say more, but I didn't. Without another word, she turned and walked away. By the weekend, she was gone, leaving behind only a few boxes of things she claimed she'd come back for later. The house felt emptier without her, but not in a way that brought relief. It was the kind of emptiness that reminded me of how full it used to be. Once she was out of the picture, I should have felt free. I should have been able to move on, to start rebuilding my life. But instead, I found myself consumed by anger. Not just at Cassandra, but at Ryan too. The man who had slipped into my life like a shadow, stealing my wife and leaving me with nothing but questions and pain. I couldn't let it go. I needed answers, closure, something to make sense of the chaos she had unleashed. So, I decided to dig deeper into Ryan's life. If he was going to take everything from me, I wanted to know who he really was. I started by hiring a private investigator. At first, it felt drastic, almost petty, but the more I thought about it, the more justified it seemed. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about arming myself with the truth. Within days, the investigator had gathered enough information to paint a clear picture of Ryan. He wasn't just some random fling. He was part of Cassandra's social circle, someone she'd met through mutual friends at her boutique. He was single, charming, and, predictably, well off. But he wasn't squeaky clean. The investigator unearthed some shady dealings tied to Ryan's job as a luxury hotel manager. Fraudulent expenses, improper dealings with vendors. It was a small scandal waiting to erupt. The kind of thing that, if exposed, could ruin his reputation and career. Armed with this knowledge, I began to plan my next move. It wasn't enough for Ryan to walk away unscathed while I picked up the pieces of my shattered life. I needed him to feel the consequences of his actions, to understand what it meant to destroy someone else's world. The first step was subtle. I anonymously leaked the information about his financial improprieties to the local press, timing it perfectly with an upcoming high-profile event he was organizing. The fallout was immediate. Articles surfaced questioning his ethics, and whispers of an investigation began circulating in his professional circles. By the time the gala rolled around, Ryan was forced to step down, his once promising career in shambles. Next, I turned my attention to Cassandra. She might have been out of my house, but she wasn't out of my mind. She had painted herself as the victim in our separation, hinting to mutual friends and family that I was controlling and emotionally distant. The lies burned like acid, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. I compiled everything, the screenshots, the paternity results, the investigator's report, and prepared to set the record straight. It wasn't about public humiliation, at least not entirely. It was about reclaiming my story, making sure the people who mattered knew the truth. The opportunity came during a family gathering. It was awkward enough being there without Cassandra, who had always been the life of the party. Whispers and sympathetic glances followed me as I moved through the room, the weight of their assumptions hanging over me like a storm cloud. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Can I have everyone's attention?" I said, standing in the center of the room. Conversations hushed as all eyes turned to me. "I know there have been a lot of rumors about why Cassandra and I split up," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "And I think it's time everyone heard the truth." I laid it all out. The affair, the paternity test, the lies. I didn't embellish or dramatize, just told the story as it happened. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Some people looked shocked, others angry, and a few, a small but satisfying few, looked ashamed for having believed Cassandra's version of events. "That's all I wanted to say," I concluded, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Thank you for listening." I walked out of the room feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had taken back control. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense, but it was enough. For now.